the darkest depths of the Atlantic, 17 warships hunted a lone submarine. Against impossible odds, one commander defied every rule of naval warfare. Silent, unseen, unstoppable. He didn't just survive. He changed the game forever. Lawson Patterson Ramage was born in 1909 in a quiet, unremarkable town in Massachusetts, a place where most boys grew up expecting ordinary lives and predictable futures. From the very beginning, however, Ramage did not quite fit the mold. He was not reckless or loud, not especially strong or commanding, but there was something restless in him, something that refused to accept the world exactly as it was presented. That difference revealed itself early. At the age of 7, while other children stayed close to home, Ramage gathered stolen pieces of lumber and built himself a crude raft. Without telling anyone, he pushed it into the river near his home and let the current carry him downstream. For 3 miles, he floated alone, past familiar landmarks and into unknown bends of water, driven not by defiance but by curiosity. When he was finally found and brought home, his father demanded an explanation. Ramage's answer was simple and unflinching. I wanted to see what was ahead. It was not an excuse. It was a philosophy, and it never changed. Years later, that same quiet curiosity carried him to the United States Naval Academy. On paper, Ramage did not look like future leadership material. He wasn't tall, broad-shouldered, or particularly intimidating. He lacked the sharp confidence and commanding presence that often defines successful naval officers. Among hundreds of midshipmen, he blended in his academic performance was solid but unspectacular, and he graduated near the bottom of his class. Many instructors overlooked him. Some doubted him. Few remembered him. But beneath that unassuming exterior was a quality that mattered far more than grades or appearances. Ramage did not panic. That trait revealed itself during a summer training cruise aboard a naval vessel. One night, a fire broke out deep in the ship. Smoke poured through ventilation shafts, thick and choking, filling passageways and disorienting anyone who entered. Alarms rang. Orders were shouted. The midshipmen were told to evacuate immediately. Most did exactly that. Ramage did not. While others rushed toward safety, Ramage moved in the opposite direction toward the smoke. He did not hesitate or seek permission. He understood the danger, but he also understood something else. Fires do not wait for perfect plans. Inside the smoke-filled compartment, he found 2 sailors collapsed on the deck, unconscious from the fumes. Without knowing whether the fire would spread or the air would grow deadlier, Ramage dragged them one by one to safety. He then returned below deck again, this time to help secure bulkhead, doors that could slow the fire's progress and save the ship. Only after the situation was under control did he surface. An officer confronted him afterward, demanding to know why he had disobeyed evacuation orders. Ramage did not apologize. He did not justify himself emotionally. He simply said, "I thought the order was incomplete, sir." That answer unsettled his superiors. It was not defiance. It was logic. NV's official evaluation, among pages of routine remarks. One line stood out, a line that would follow Ramage throughout his career: does not panic, does not follow. It was not meant as praise, but it was dotted as his naval career progressed. That same mindset continued to define him. Ramage respected authority, but he trusted reasoning more. He followed orders when they made sense and questioned them when they didn't, not out of arrogance, but out of responsibility. He believed that obedience without understanding was dangerous, especially at sea, where conditions changed faster than instructions could. This philosophy earned him both reprimands and quiet admiration. During one night exercise, a destroyer lost power and began drifting toward a reef in high winds. The captain ordered all ships to maintain position. It was too dangerous to approach in the darkness. Ramage, serving as officer of the deck, calculated the drifts, the wind, and the available time. He knew waiting meant losing the ship, so he acted. He ordered his vessel dangerously close and launched a tow line using a grappling hook he had personally designed weeks earlier. Anticipating exactly this scenario, the destroyer was pulled clear, and a costly loss was avoided. Officially, Ramage was reprimanded for disobeying orders. Unofficially, he was recommended for submarine service. The recommendation included a note that captured him perfectly. Ramage treats orders as suggestions and physics as negotiable. Submarines, it turned out, were where Ramage belonged. Beneath the surface, away from ceremony and spectacle. Success depended not on rank or appearance, but on judgment under pressure. In the confined steel hull of a submarine, panic was lethal. Calm calculation was everything. Ramage thrived. While others relied strictly on doctrine, he relied on numbers. He measured distances, angles, probabilities. He understood that fear distorted thinking, and that clarity could be weaponized. On patrol, he repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to close in closer than regulations allowed, not because he enjoyed danger, but because he understood geometry, timing, and enemy limitations. His superiors began to notice. Patrol reports described him as aggressive, but precise. Bold, but never careless. He was not gambling. He was solving problems faster than others were willing to. By the time Ramage was given command of his own submarine, the pattern was clear. He was not a man chasing glory or survival. He was chasing outcomes. Where others asked how to get home safely, Ramage asked what it would take to finish the job completely. That mindset formed on a childhood raft, drifting into the unknown, hardened in smoke-filled compartments, and refined through years of calculated defiance, would eventually lead him to one of the most extraordinary submarine actions in naval history. And when the moment came, when he surfaced into overwhelming danger, it would not be courage that guided him. It would be the same question he had asked his father decades earlier. What's ahead, and is it worth going there? Ramage gradually developed a reputation that followed him from ship to ship. It was not the reputation of a reckless officer or a man who enjoyed breaking rules for the sake of ego. Instead, it was something more unsettling to traditional commanders. Ramage disobeyed orders, but never without a reason, and never without running the numbers first. He did not see orders as sacred instructions frozen in time. He saw them as guidance written for average conditions, and he understood that war rarely offered average conditions. As a young officer assigned to surface ships, Ramage spent long hours observing how decisions were made under pressure. He noticed a pattern. When danger appeared, most officers clung more tightly to procedure, even when circumstances clearly demanded flexibility. To Ramage, this was not discipline. It was hesitation disguised as professionalism. That belief would soon place him in conflict with authority. During a nighttime exercise in heavy seas, one of the Navy's destroyers lost power. Without propulsion, the ship began drifting steadily toward a reef, pushed by wind and current. Visibility was poor, the sea was rough, and darkness erased any margin for error. The commanding officer overseeing the exercise issued a clear order. All ships were to maintain position. Approaching the disabled destroyer at night was deemed too dangerous. Ramage was serving as officer of the deck at the time. From his position, he studied the drifting ship, the wind speed, the current direction, and the distance to the reef. He calculated how long the destroyer had before it would run aground. The answer was simple and terrifying. It didn't have enough time. Maintaining position, as ordered, guaranteed the ship's loss. Ramage had anticipated scenarios like this long before that night. Weeks earlier, without being told to do so, he had designed and tested a rifle-launched grappling hook, specifically for emergency towing situations where conventional methods would fail. It was an unofficial invention, not standard equipment, and not part of any approved doctrine. Now it was the only option, without requesting permission. Ramage ordered his ship to close within dangerously short range of the powerless destroyer. In the darkness and high winds, one wrong calculation could have caused a collision or cost lives. But Ramage trusted his math more than the safety of distance. He fired the grappling hook, secured a line, and coordinated the tow. Slowly, carefully, the disabled destroyer was pulled clear of the reef. A ship worth millions of dollars and the lives aboard it were saved. The aftermath was predictable. Ramage was formally reprimanded for disobeying a direct order. The Navy, after all, could not publicly endorse officers who acted independently, no matter the result. But behind closed doors, the tone was very different. Senior officers recognized what had actually occurred. Ramage had seen a problem, others had not, prepared for it in advance, and acted decisively when hesitation would have been fatal. Alongside the reprimand came a quiet recommendation: Ramage should be transferred to submarine duty. Submarines were different. They demanded officers who could operate in isolation, make rapid decisions without guidance, and remain calm while carrying the weight of dozens of lives in their hands. In the silent, enclosed world beneath the ocean's surface, there was no room for panic and no time for rigid obedience. It was an environment perfectly suited to Ramage's mindset. Once assigned to submarines, his true strength finally emerged. Traditional submarine doctrine emphasized caution. The commanders were taught to attack from long range, fire a limited number of torpedoes, and withdraw immediately to preserve the boat. Survival, not destruction, was often treated as the primary objective. Ramage studied this doctrine carefully and found its assumptions flawed. Distance, he realized, created uncertainty. The farther a submarine was from its target, the more variables entered the equation. Target speed changes, course adjustments, zigzag patterns, and time delays. Each additional yard increased the chance of failure. To Ramage, this was not safety, it was inefficiency. On one patrol, this philosophy brought him into direct disagreement with his commanding officer. The submarine had been tracking a Japanese transport vessel, protected by escorts. Standard procedure dictated an attack from approximately 3,000 yards a distance considered safe enough to allow escape after firing. Ramage ran the numbers. He studied the transport's speed, its zigzag pattern, and the limitations of the escort destroyer's guns. Then he approached the captain quietly and made his recommendation. They should close to 800 yards at that distance. Ramage explained, the transport's maneuvering would be irrelevant. The torpedoes would have almost no opportunity to miss. Even more critically, the escort destroyers would not be able to depress their guns low enough to effectively fire at the submarine. The captain was stunned. Closing to 800 yards meant bringing a submarine within what many considered point-blank range. It violated every instinct drilled into submarine officers. But Ramage was not arguing instinct. He was arguing geometry. After a tense pause, the captain agreed. The submarine closed in. At 750 yards, they fired a spread of torpedoes. 3 found their mark. The Japanese transports sank in minutes. The escorts rushed in, passing so close overhead that the crew could hear propellers slicing the water, like machinery just beyond the hull. Yet the submarine escaped without damage. The attack was flawless. The patrol report that followed captured Ramage in a single sentence. Ramage combines aggressive instinct with mathematical precision. That line marked a turning point. No longer seen as merely unconventional, Ramage was now recognized as something far more dangerous to the enemy, and far more valuable to the Navy. His aggression was not emotional. It was calculated. His risks were not gambles. They were solutions. From that point forward, Ramage's career accelerated. He was trusted with greater responsibility, given command opportunities, and eventually handed submarines and crews specifically chosen for aggressive operations. His methods were studied, debated, and quietly imitated. Ramage had proven something that many commanders were unwilling to admit. Doctrine could protect lives, but it could also limit victory. And in war, the difference between the two often came down to a single decision, whether to keep distance or close in and make certainty unavoidable. On July 30th, 1944, Lawson Patterson Ramage found what every submarine commander searched for and what most hoped to avoid. Near the waters off Borneo, his submarine made contact with a massive Japanese convoy moving in tight formation. Through binoculars and periscope lenses, the picture became clear. 17 ships, including 4 destroyers guarding a collection of freighters and fuel tankers bound for Japanese air bases in the Philippines. It was exactly the kind of target naval doctrine warned against. Standard submarine tactics were conservative by design. Commanders were trained to remain submerged, fire a limited number of torpedoes from long range, and withdraw as quickly as possible. Survival was the priority. Against a convoy this size, doctrine predicted 1 or 2 successful hits at best before enemy destroyers forced the submarine deep and hunted it relentlessly. Ramage looked at the convoy and did the math. 2 torpedoes, maybe 2 ships, and a safe escape. That was the safe equation, but it was also unacceptable. 17 ships carrying fuel, supplies, and troops were worth far more than 1 submarine playing it safe. Ramage understood that staying submerged meant surrendering opportunity. Distance created uncertainty. Time favored the enemy. So, he chose a different equation. In broad daylight. With enemy lookouts scanning the horizon, Ramage ordered his submarine to the surface directly into the center of the convoy. It was an act that defied every instinct taught in submarine school. Submarines did not surface near destroyers. They did not expose themselves in daylight, and they certainly did not do so at point-blank range. But confusion was a weapon. When the submarine broke the surface, Japanese crews stared in disbelief. For a few critical seconds, they hesitated, trying to understand what they were seeing. Ramage used that hesitation perfectly. Orders snapped across the bridge. Torpedo tubes opened. Bearings were called out. Torpedoes were fired. Explosions tore through the convoy. A fuel tanker erupted in a towering fireball as aviation gasoline ignited, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air. Nearby freighters carrying ammunition detonated in secondary blasts that shattered windows and buckled steel. Within moments, ships were burning, sinking, and colliding as formations collapsed. Then came the response. Destroyers turned hard toward Ramage's submarine, their guns swinging into position. Ramage waited only long enough to fire again, then ordered the boat to dive. Torpedo charges followed, detonating close enough to shake the hull and rain insulation from the ceiling. The submarine went silent, slipping away beneath the chaos. But Ramage wasn't retreating. Minutes later, he was already repositioning. He tracked the scattered ships on plotting charts, identifying patterns in their escape routes. When the destroyers moved to protect one group, he aimed for another. When they searched deep, he surfaced somewhere unexpected. For more than 8 hours, Ramage repeated the same deadly cycle. Surface, fire, dive, reposition, return. Each time, the attacks grew more audacious. He surfaced again and again, sometimes within a mile, sometimes closer, firing torpedoes at tankers and freighters while enemy guns opened fire. He used destroyers as shields, firing torpedoes past them to force impossible choices. Evade the submarine or evade the torpedoes racing toward valuable ships behind them. When a destroyer charged directly at him, Ramage stayed on the surface, long enough to fire at point-blank range. One torpedo missed. The other struck home, breaking the destroyer in half. Ramage watched it sink before ordering another dive. Night fell, but the battle did not slow. Under cover of darkness, Ramage hunted by radar, closing in on tightly packed groups of ships. He positioned his submarine at precise angles so torpedoes could pass through formations, striking ship after ship in sequence. Time after time, explosions echoed across the water. Fires turned the night sky orange. Oil and fuel burned on the surface, illuminating wreckage and survivors. The Japanese response grew frantic. Depth charges fell by the dozens. One blast cracked a ballast tank. Inside the submarine, temperatures climbed above 100 degrees. Men drank hot water, exhausted and shaken, but Ramage remained calm, methodically plotting the next attack. When the depth charging stopped, he waited, then he surfaced again. By the final hours of the night, only scattered remnants of the convoy remained. One destroyer continued to circle, still searching. Ramage reloaded his torpedo tubes one last time, closed the distance carefully, and fired. A final spread. The destroyer vanished in a massive explosion that lit the ocean for miles. Silence followed. When dawn approached, the sea was littered with burning wrecks and sinking hulls. The convoy no longer existed. By the end of the night, the results were almost impossible to believe. 17 ships destroyed Savanche, 1,000-ton Sunquan Submarine 1. Commander when Ramage radioed his patrol report. Headquarters hesitated. The numbers seemed unrealistic. A reply came back asking if there had been a mistake, if perhaps he meant 7 ships, not 17. Ramage's response was brief and unemotional. Confirmed 17. The math, as always, had been correct. Lawson Patterson Ramage was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. It recognized extraordinary heroism, decisive leadership, and unmatched effectiveness in combat. Yet for Ramage himself, the medal was never the point. He rarely spoke about it, never displayed it prominently, and never used it to define his identity. When journalists or junior officers asked him about the night, he destroyed 17 enemy ships. They expected stories of courage, fear, or luck. Ramage offered none of those. He did not call what he had done bravery. He called it logic. To him, the events of that night were not driven by emotion or daring. They were the outcome of a calculation one he had made calmly and deliberately. Ramage believed that courage was often misunderstood. True courage, in his view, was not the absence of fear, nor was it blind defiance of danger. It was the ability to decide what mattered most and act consistently with that decision, even when the cost was high. Most commanders, when facing overwhelming odds, asked a single question: will I survive? It was a natural question. Survival meant experience could be passed on, crews could fight another day, and ships could return home. Naval doctrine reinforced this mindset, encouraging commanders to preserve their boats whenever possible. Ramage asked a different question. Did I fire every torpedo I brought? That question revealed everything about how he viewed war. Survival, to Ramage, was not the objective, it was a constraint. The mission came first. If survival supported the mission, it was valuable. If it limited the mission, it had to be challenged. This did not mean Ramage was careless with lives. On the contrary, he was deeply aware that every decision he made affected the men under his command. What set him apart was that he believed wasting opportunity was a greater betrayal of his crew than risking danger. He believed that asking men to fight while holding back was more dangerous in the long run than asking them to commit fully. To Ramage, success was not defined by returning home unscathed. It was defined by mission completion. This philosophy became clear in the advice he later gave to young submarine officers. Speaking calmly, without drama, he once explained his thinking in simple terms. If you want to sink 17 ships, you must take 17 shots. And to take 17 shots, you must survive 16. It was not a motivational slogan, it was an operational truth. War did not reward caution alone, and it did not reward recklessness either. It rewarded clarity. Ramage understood that every torpedo left unfired was a decision in itself, chose to preserve safety at the expense of effectiveness. After the war ended, Ramage remained in the Navy, rising in rank and serving with distinction. He commanded submarine squadrons, helped shape future doctrine, and earned the respect of generations of officers. Yet even as his reputation grew, he remained personally modest. He did not build his identity around past battles. He rarely spoke of medals or personal achievements. And when he did, he redirected attention to his crew. I had a good crew, he would say. To Ramage, leadership was never about individual glory. It was about building a team capable of executing difficult decisions under pressure and trusting them to do so. When Ramage eventually retired, he did so quietly. There were no grand speeches or public celebrations. He returned to Massachusetts, near the same river where he had once floated downstream as a boy, curious about what lay beyond the bend. In retirement, he lived simply, spending his time fishing, reflecting, and staying largely out of the public eye. When he died, His gravestone reflected the man he had always been. It listed only his name, rank, and dates of service. There was no mention of the Medal of Honor, no mention of 17 ships sunk in a single night, no attempt to immortalize the legend, but his legacy did not disappear with him. At the United States Naval Academy, Ramage's philosophy lives on in a small, unassuming display. Beside his Medal of Honor is a simple note card, written in his own handwriting. On it are 3 short rules that every submarine officer candidate sees at least once in their training. Get close, stay late, leave when the torpedoes are gone. Those words are not instructions to be reckless. They are reminders to commit fully. They speak to preparation, endurance, and follow-through. They are about understanding when safety becomes hesitation, and when caution becomes waste. Ramage's story endures not because of the number of ships he sank, but because of the clarity with which he lived. He did not allow fear to define success. He did not confuse survival with purpose. He understood that once a person decides what truly matters, the path forward becomes obvious even when it is dangerous. That night in 1944 was not an act of madness. It was not a gamble fueled by ego or desperation. It was clarity in its purest form. And that clarity is why Lawson Patterson Ramage is remembered not as a reckless commander, but as a rational one who understood that in war, as in life, the right question can change everything. Ever possible.